You know, I nearly forgot to record this video because I was so sidetracked with, legitimately, the thought of how different would my life be if my right thumb was made of sponge. Hello everyone, I am Tessellating Hexagons. Today's the 15th day of VEDA and of April because the two are just that interconnected, and that's a weird gesture. Why am I still doing it? Anyway, we're into the third rotation of things. Yeah, we're into the third week of VEDA. Wow. So, third fair trial. There's not really much more intro I can give because last week I established what a proper 2016 Fair Trial Friday should look like, and so I don't need to do any pre-explaining. Now, I did have a bit of a long, hard think about what game I should do this week to review or consider deeply, and I found it difficult to pick one out to run with and see how I feel about it, but as of a recording session yesterday, and obviously having edited that yesterday and then proof-watched it today and uploaded it today, yeah, I think it's high time that I actually give Another Code R a fair trial. There we go. There's so much glare coming in from my window, which is right behind the camera, so it's hard to hold things up to the camera, but Another Code R, Journey into Lost Memories, part of the Another Code duology pair of games. Anyway, it's the sequel to the DS version called Another Code 2 Memories, or Trace Memory something or other in America, and America didn't get this game. It's a Europe and Japan exclusive, so fuck you, America. But yeah, after the episode that I uploaded today, which was episode 25 if you're not watching this live, I feel like it needs something of a fair trial, just to have a proper look at it. It's for the Wii. The first game in the series is for the DS, but this is its direct sequel for the Wii. It takes place 2 years after the first game, and really, I feel like there's not much I can say to introduce it. By the way, I paid £8 for it in case you were wondering what that sticker was in the corner. I don't even remember how many years ago I got this, but anyway, enough getting sidetracked. There's not much that I can say to introduce the game that you won't discover from watching my LP of it, so I'm probably going to have a link to the playlist of that LP on screen the entire time throughout this review, or at the very least for a lot of this video, just because, well, that's an LP that I am currently doing ongoing as of the recording of this video, but will probably be finished by the time anyone actually cares enough to watch this video. In any case, if you want to see what the game is like in person, then just watch my LP of it. But the story is that there's the main character, Ashley Mizuki Robbins, who her father's American, her mother's Japanese, and for some reason she finds it necessary to introduce herself using her full name, middle name included, to everyone she meets, and it's a point-and-click puzzle mystery kind of. I mentioned in the LP that in the UK it was marketed more as like a visual novel than it was a puzzle game or anything like that. And so as a result, it was marketed at, not middle-aged women, but women just under middle age, kind of. Like, for example, I think it was used as part of a Mother's Day promotion, like games to get the family involved in consoles. Buy this for your mother on Mother's Day. And that was the same marketing campaign that suggested the Professor Layton series as a potential Father's Day gift, which they're all good games, but I'm not quite sure I see the connection there. They are kind of stretching it a little bit. Yes, it's equal parts point and click and mystery and visual novel, and it's very character heavy, and I'm not quite sure how I can talk about it, because I've done enough of an LP for you to be able to extrapolate all you need to understand the game. But I should explain it here in case you don't feel like watching the... Calm down, random speck of dust floating in front of the camera. It's a direct follow-up to the events of the previous game, which I've never played and I'm not familiar with, and I probably should play it at some point, but this game... Yeah, we have the main character, Ashley Mizuki Robbins. It's 2 years after the previous game. In the previous game, she met up with her estranged father, and then stuff happened, and then he became estranged again, and Ashley's currently living with her aunt, and then out of the blue, 2 years after the previous game, she gets a letter from her father saying, yo, come to Lake Juliet, and something. Ostensibly, he wants to rekindle their father-daughter relationship. That sounds incestuous. He wants to be friends with his daughter. he wants to make up for lost time. And so he invites her to Lake Juliet, which just so happens to be where his place of work is also based. And yes, there are a lot of name puns like that throughout the game. There's Lake Juliet in the Romeo Mountains. Ashley's father works at a place called JC Valley. And, but following on from the whole Romeo-Juliet aesthetic, that's Juliet Capulet Valley, even though it's never stated within the game. There's MJ Labs, which I can only assume stands for Memory Jog Labs, because the game is... There is sci-fi, like, it's low sci-fi, but it's to do with the science of memory. But, like, that's a recurring theme, but it's not the sci-fi-iest thing on the planet. I saw one review that compared it to, I think, the Persona games, which I've never played, so I wouldn't know, but it's got the mundaneness of teenage life with sci-fi and intrigue and mystery and stuff. So anyway, Ashley goes to Lake Juliet, shit happens, and then story. And somehow the entire game takes place over the course of a single day, which is surprising. And I did muse in the LP itself. Does the game run in near enough real time? Because it doesn't run in actual real time, obviously. So if you leave the game running, time won't progress. But I do feel like if you were to sit down with this game and start playing it at, I don't know, let's say 11 in the morning, and then just play through the game without stopping, then the game's events would probably sync up with the real-world time fairly nicely. Anyway, I've rambled a lot about the background of this game and not actually got into talking about it, like, on an analytical level. So I'll begin, as I always do when reviewing stuff, with what it does right. Well, first of all, and I've seen the internet praise it quite highly on this front as well, the art style of this game is surprisingly beautiful. It's got kind of a maybe hand-painted, a very watercolor aesthetic, and given that the setting is... certainly for the first 80% of the game, really nature. You know, it's this American lake resort place. It's Lake Juliet. It's all nature, natural, you know, harmony of people and nature. And so the art style really fits, and it's gorgeous. And on a similar note, the soundtrack of the game as well, bearing in mind, from a distance, it looks like a bargain bin game that, you know, why would you play this? You could just get it in the pound shop and it's not that good. But it actually is. And it's got a soundtrack that you'd expect from, like, a first-party, maybe not AAA game, but certainly it's got a gorgeous soundtrack. It's absolutely beautiful. I described it to my mother as Orient-Occident. It's mostly Western, but there are definitely some Eastern influences in there because, as I said, the main character is half American, half Japanese, and you can tell that's reflected through the soundtrack, and most characters and most situations have their own leitmotifs, and you can hear that pervading throughout the entire soundtrack, and it's really, really nicely done. There are a lot of really great tracks on the soundtrack. Overall, it's got a really beautiful artistic style to it on both of those fronts. And the characters as well are actually really, really well written. Like, in my LP, I have complained that, for instance, there's a character called Elizabeth who is almost the stereotypical spoilt brat kind of broken home but has a rich daddy and so she's not allowed to complain because she's so well-to-do. And as a character, I hate her because she is insufferable. She is so unbelievably bratty and I feel like she has no redeeming features. But, having said that, she's a really well-written character because it's believable. A person in that situation would grow up to behave like that. It's not implausible. And another example, Ashley's father, Dr. Richard Robbins, he reminds me of my own father in a number of ways. He's got a load of little dad quirks that fit. Ashley herself, you know, she is kind of the stereotypical main character. It wouldn't surprise me if you could get like an anime sort of thing out of the story of this game. And she seems very much like an anime protagonist. But she still has quirks about her that remind you she is still only 16 years old. She behaves like a 16-year-old. Sometimes the decisions she makes are irrational because they make sense in the short term but not the long term. So she thinks like a teenage girl. Not to say that, you know, oh, you think like a girl. No, but like she thinks in the same way that a teenage girl would. Similarly, she befriends a 13-year-old boy who behaves like a 13-year-old boy. And so the characters are really well written. They make you feel the way you're supposed to feel. There's a character in the point of the game that I've reached actually right now in the LP as of the time of recording, who, like, her name is kind of a spoiler, but you meet her right at the end of Chapter 6 at the start of Chapter 7. And, again, she's one of the ones who has no redeeming features, and I don't like her. But for someone in her situation, she's really well written. Does that follow on with what I was just saying? I'm going on such a tangent about these things that I can't remember what I just said. So the characters are plausibly written and all of that good stuff. And the puzzles. It's a visual novel, but it's got puzzles in it as well, so it doesn't just feel like a book played on the Wii. It's not just a visual novel. There's more than enough puzzle and gameplay elements to it to make it feel like it's a game and not just a visual novel. So, for one, there's the exploration aspect. Apparently the DS game that came before this one had a top-down perspective. This one has a 2.5D perspective in that most of the time, when you're going between areas, like when you're wandering around the world that is Lake Juliet, then it's essentially side-scrolling, but there'll be paths into the foreground and background and corners and stuff, and it's all really clearly like, it's not patronizingly signposted, but it's really well executed for what it is. And similarly, if you're in a room and looking around for stuff, instead of walking around a room freely, you can just rotate around one of 4 fixed perspectives. And as this review that I saw pointed out, that's really good because being as it is point and click in terms of style, apart from wandering around the overworld, its main thing is being a point and click mystery game. And by having fixed viewpoints, but not like having more than one fixed viewpoint per room, for one, is nice because it doesn't feel too limiting because you can still look around. But by having a set number of fixed perspectives on rooms, it really cuts down on that old problem of, in these point-and-click games, you have to wonder, am I in exactly the right position in this room to see what I need to find? Because if you can only look in one of 4 directions in every given room, then that'll narrow down your options fairly quickly to find what you need to find in order to solve whatever puzzle. And then there are the puzzles themselves. There are typically 2 main kinds. There's the general type of puzzle where you're given a situation and you have to use the items you have to find a way out of that situation. The earliest example that it gives to you is there are these recycling machines dotted around the campsite because it's a resort place, and so they encourage recycling because environmental friendliness. And every now and then you'll get these empty cans of carbonated beverage, and you have to put them in this machine, you pull a handle, and then you get a token out of it, which you can then exchange for gumballs, but they don't really serve any purpose. But that's the introduction to how that sort of puzzle works. And then later on, you get stuff like testing the acidity of lake water using a pH testing kit. You have stuff like having a cover on a wall panel that is just barely openable, but you need to find some sort of leverage to properly pop it open, and all you have that you are able to use are the items that you've accrued through the game up to this point. You have to work out which one the right one is and how to use it. And apparently the first game was criticized for having very, very few far between items, so if you need an item for a puzzle, you'd have to backtrack to ages ago to find this erstwhile seemingly inconspicuous and irrelevant object that you now need to solve a puzzle, because that's something that this game does as well. You can't take an item until you know that you need it most of the time, which is a little bit frustrating if today's episode was anything to judge by. Just take the fucking fishing rod. Anyway, I mentioned there were 2 types of puzzles. The second type, he says, holding up one finger, are the so-called TAS puzzles. It's a mechanic that's introduced fairly early in the game. You get an item called a TAS, the True Another system, which looks like a Wii Remote because that's a thing that this game series does. You have pieces of technology that look like the console you're playing on, because in the first game you had this thing called a DAS, which looked like a DS, and in this game you've got an upgraded DAS that looks like a DSi, which kind of date stamps when this game was made, and also you've got this Wii Remote, which is referred to as TAS, and you use that to open electronic locks, and I gush about those puzzles a lot in my playthrough, because they are so clever, they are so much fun. They tell you to press buttons in a certain order on the Wii Remote, but it's not that straightforward. It'll do things like, press the 1 button, press the 2 button, now press the 3 button, but the answer is to press 1, then the plus button, then the 2 button. Stuff like that, and then later in the game it introduces twist the remote at this angle and then press this button. Or press the buttons within a certain amount of time, otherwise the screen will glitch out and then you'll have to start again. And so, most of the time the answers are intuitive. They don't hold your hand, but you can guess what the answer is, and what is most likely your first guess is the right answer. So, in that regard, they're really well made, and that's why I really love those types of puzzles. So there's a lot that this game does right, basically. But I should talk about the stuff that doesn't do quite as well, because that is the reason why I brought this onto this show in the first place. as I said, there's a lot that the game does right in its style, in its execution, in its puzzles. One problem that I have, though, is, well, the characters, Ashley in particular, because as I said, she does act plausibly, she does behave like a teenage girl would. But there are some really agonizingly, why would you do that, or why wouldn't you do that moments that only serve to benefit the plot of the game rather than... It's not that she's breaking character, it's just that every now and then she'll do something really aggravating. Like, there's a phenomenon that I've been referring to throughout the game as secret diarrhea. Like, she'll be told classified information, she'll learn things that she really shouldn't share with people, and then just blurt out her entire life story whenever meeting someone new. And similarly, whenever she has to talk to a character that she's not seen in a little while and bring them up to speed on the events that have happened in the game so far, she will do so in agonizing detail. She will spend a lot of time stressing every last detail of what's happened since she last saw that character in particular, and it seems really needless. I mean, it makes sense in a diegetic context, because she's going to need to bring that character up to speed so that they can understand what they need to understand in order to progress the plot. But the Touch Detective games handled this situation beautifully. If Mackenzie in Touch Detective needed to explain a lot of complicated or just a lot of recent events to someone, the screen would fade to black, it would say explaining, and then fade back in. That does seem like a little bit, I don't know, lazy, shorthandy kind of thing. But that works perfectly fine for the situation that it's used for. With this, you have to sit through her explaining the same thing about 5 times before actually progressing the story, and it is rather aggravating. Similarly, there are points in the game, and today's episode is why I bring this up. There are some points in the game where it's got a good difficulty curve, you feel like you understand what's going on, and then every now and then it'll drop in this cryptic as shit puzzle that it doesn't make any sense. The answer isn't obvious. Like, obviously it shouldn't be too obvious, but there is no way of logically working it out. It's just bumble around until you find the right answer. There's a point where you need to search Ashley's father's home away from home, his house near work, to find some medicine. And there is no medicine in the house. So you need to look around the house and discover that you have to look in every last possible nook and cranny, and then I think either try to leave or go back upstairs where another character's waiting for you, or something that's really not telegraphed in order to determine that, oh, there isn't medicine. Because if you try to leave the house before doing that, then she'll just say, oh, I need to find medicine. But there is no medicine. But I need to find medicine. Oh, there's no medicine. Maybe I should leave now. Like, that's what I told you to do in the first place! And more recently, there's a puzzle where you need to open this mechanical shutter, which is most of the way closed. And there's an ID card on the other side of that shutter. And so your first thought is, oh, I'll just find some way of grabbing that ID card, bringing it to this side, and then scanning it to open the shutter. Whether or not ID cards can actually be used to open those shutters in context, I don't know. I feel like they should, but maybe they don't actually. But nevertheless, that was my first thought. But the actual answer is to look at the floor underneath the shutter on the other side, then the book that's holding the shutter open, then the floor again, then go into another room that you had no reason to go into prior to this to get a compact mirror. You put the mirror underneath the shutter, then go back into that room and get a fishing rod, then use the fishing rod to poke the mirror into position and then angle it so that you can see the task lock on the other side of the shutter. That makes no fucking sense! Plus, I suppose it is a very slow-paced game as well. Like, it makes sense for the story it wants to tell, but there is a lot of talking in this game, even if you factor out Ashley repeating stuff unnecessarily. Which makes sense, because it is part mystery visual novel. I've done 25 episodes of it so far, and apart from the first 2, those have been half-hour episodes. Well, on average, it's been half-hour episodes throughout. I think episode 1 was 20 minutes, episode 2 was 26, then it was half-hour or more for the rest of the project. And I've just started the final non-epilogue chapter. Well, that will be starting as of episode 26. So it is slow going and it is very text heavy. So if you don't have the patience for that, then it might not be your sort of thing. It makes sense with the genre, but if you're just in it for the puzzles, then you might be a little bit turned off from all talking. Plus there's a mechanic when talking to other characters where they'll say something that's in green text, and then that'll bring up a text bubble which you can pursue that as a line of questioning later in the conversation. And I feel like those are optional, but I don't know for certain if you can just skip those. And if you do skip them and it lets you, then you might permanently miss out on a vital piece of information. Either that, or you can leave the conversation, but you'll have to come back and see the conversation through to its fullest conclusion. Either way, it's kind of flawed, but I think the idea to not pursue green text is best saved for someone who's played the game before and already knows the story. Which I suppose is something the game does right. It does have a New Game Plus mode, where one of the features is you can scroll through text faster. That's about it. Considering what the game is, it doesn't have much replay value because it doesn't need much replay value until you forget the story, then you want to experience it again. But the story itself is actually really interesting, really engaging. I like it. I do like this real-world sci-fi 20 minutes into the future kind of stuff, because the game takes place in the year 2007, but it's still kind of almost Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror level of 20 minutes into the future, so that there is crazy futuristic technology, but it doesn't define their world. So it does still seem very plausible. It's almost like an episode of Doctor Who set on present-day Earth, but with Doctor Who-ish technology every now and then. So overall, let's have a look at how the general public feel about this game. Overall, the average rating that I've seen, Metacritic rates it at 3.5 stars, but because it's not available in America, a lot of people don't know it exists, so I feel like people don't feel too strongly about getting it or avoiding it. I'll go out on a limb and put my rating closer to here, because the game does have its flaws. It does have a lot of flaws. As I say in the episode that I uploaded today, I will defend this game on a lot of things. That puzzle with the mirror and the fishing rod I cannot forgive, but the rest of it I'll happily defend because it has some obvious flaws. But it does a lot right in exchange. It's not like these flaws don't make the game unplayable. It just means you have to sit back and fold your arms and think, what were they thinking when they programmed the game to be exactly like this? But for the most part, it's actually a lot of fun. So I will recommend getting it with the asterisk that if you're into good mystery fiction with a bit of sci-fi in there, and you have a head for puzzles, then yes, it's absolutely definitely worth it. If you're just in it for the puzzles, then I would recommend it, but just be ready to sit through a lot of text and get invested in the story, because, as I said, the characters are plausible, and the story is actually really good and really interesting, but you will have to sit through a lot of text. And if you're just in it for the mystery novel aspect, then be ready for some cryptic puzzles. It's nothing you can't work through most of the time, and if it is that difficult, there are plenty of walkthroughs on the internet, so if you're in it for the story, then I do recommend it, because the puzzles are just there to give it some gameplay, and it is good gameplay. And if you're not into puzzles or the visual novel aspect, then obviously give it a miss, because why would you even? Overall, I do feel like it was grossly mismarketed in this country, because they could have played towards the visual novel mystery crowd. You know, I'm sure they could have marketed it as a puzzle game, is what I'm saying. Well, a puzzle mystery. They could have marketed it in the same way they marketed Professor Layton, for instance. But instead they just went with hey, look, mothers, it's a novel you like reading, right? And that's kind of as far as they went with it. So it's clever, and it's a better game than it was marketed as. But it does have its faults, but its faults aren't that bad. It's just every now and then there'll be a little spike of what the fuck do I do. But in any case, I like it enough to Let's Play it, and I did say in yesterday's video it would be in my top 5 Let's Plays of all time, but I didn't include it on that list because I was only including games that I'd completed on that list, so... I mean, I've completed this game before, I just haven't LP'd it to completion. You know what I mean. Anyway, well, if that game looks good to you and you don't live in North America, then get it. And if you do live in North America, well, I don't know, like, import a European Wii and then get it. I don't know, it's really not my problem. But I have to praise, by the way, they knew it wasn't going to be released in North America, so it's written in British English. Fucking thank you. Apart from every now and then, the word mom will slip in there, but apart from that, it's in British English, so fucking thank you. But other than that, okay, I think I've said all I can say about it. Plus, I mean, got it for £8, so it's not going to be that... Like, bearing in mind, that was in 2011 when I bought this, I think. It's not going to be that expensive. So, I'd say it's worth looking into if it sounds like your sort of game. If it sounds like your sort of game, then it probably is, and it's adequately cheap, so I recommend looking into it. But for this video, I will say I have been and will continue to be Tessellating Hexagons, and I'll see you in whichever video of mine you happen to choose to watch next. Goodbye.